Hello, everybody. Welcome to our Sound Systems launch event. We're really excited to have you all here. My name is Ed Finn. I'm the founding director of the Center for Science and the Imagination here at Arizona State University, and very excited to be kicking this off with my collaborator and partner in crime, Alex Laing. The mission of our center is to inspire collective imagination for better futures. And we have done that by inviting people to tell stories about the future and imagine more hopeful futures in a whole range of different contexts, from artificial intelligence to space exploration to solar energy infrastructure in the Southwest. But I never really thought that we would be doing anything like this project on the future of the symphony orchestra. And it started a few years ago when Alex and I were on a board together for a performing arts high school here in the Phoenix area. And Alex had been thinking a lot about the role of the orchestra in Arizona and Phoenix, and I'll let him talk a little bit more about that, but also just conceptually, what is the orchestra for? And he had read some of our work on climate futures, and he thought about how every big American city has this beautiful building and prime real estate downtown that's always very nicely air conditioned. And, in a place like Phoenix where it gets really hot, is that a resource and a piece of infrastructure that you could be doing different things with? You also can think about it. This is also, we were living through COVID-19, living through George Floyd and Black Lives Matter, living through a whole series of different tumultuous moments in American history that made you think about the other ways that the orchestra is a kind of piece of infrastructure and a place that people gather, they create community. And in so many ways, it feels like it's a vessel to preserve the past. And part of the inversion in the conversation Alex and I started having was, well, what if you start to look forward with the orchestra? And if maybe it's not just about preserving the past, because also the orchestra needs to evolve. And we're living in this moment of change, and the traditional relationships that people have had with orchestras, I think, are in flux, and people are really starting to question or imagine new possibilities. And so we started talking, and we started to make some plans to create a project to do something like what we've done around climate futures and some of these other areas, to bring together musicians and composers and people involved in the running and the leadership of orchestras with other kinds of experts, people who work on public health, people who work on the built environment and urban studies, all sorts of different people. And of course, because it's the Center for Science and the Imagination, also speculative fiction authors to help us imagine visceral, inviting, engaging stories about what some of these futures might look like. So it's been a tremendous project. It's been a tremendous ride so far, and we're really excited to see this book coming out at the end of it. So I'm going to turn things over to Alex to talk a little bit more about the book. And maybe, Alex, anything you want to add to my version of the story, my history of the history, and help us get this thing kicked off.
Yeah, so first off, I'm so happy to be here. Thanks to Ed and Joey and the whole team at CSI for this journey and also for today. Yeah, just to give some more sort of context to the what is this. I have always, so I started, really focusing on orchestras exclusively as sort of like what I was going to do with my career um, for grad school, though I was pretty focused on it beforehand. I did this program at the Manhattan School that was a master's in orchestral performance. And so you learned about orchestras as ensembles. So that was a unique differentiation in that all the music you studied was just for orchestras. It was all just about what it would take to win an audition in an orchestra, but also you were studying orchestras as organizations. And so I found that that was actually really fascinating for me, allowed me to sort of stretch some intellectual muscles that I have and wanted to play with. And also, I realized that the questions I had about orchestras that were really with me and have been with me, which I can kind of sum up as like, where are the Black people? That question was not being answered, of course, during a rehearsal, right? That's not taken up by the orchestra as ensemble; it's taken up by the orchestra as organization. So, that's where so I had this interest in it, and that's also where the questions I wanted to answer were being sort of wrestled with. At the same time, this is the late '90s, And so there was this real sort of conversation about change that was very active in the field at that time, partly because we were coming up on a new century. So like, what's the 21st century orchestra? What's the 21st century orchestral musician? But also a big study had come out shortly before I started grad school called Americanizing the American Orchestra, which you can go down that rabbit hole after this, or you can look it up at Google as I'm talking. But anyway, that kind of set the stage for this long journey I've been on. So I was sort of made with the idea that orchestras needed to change or were in a change process, and you needed to locate yourself within that. For better or for worse, that's kind of was a formative thought for me. It worked in part because there were things I wanted to see. Again, going back to that question of like, where are the Black people? That in order for, you know, I did want things to be different in that regard. Then to locate it here in this conversation, as Ed pointed out, yeah, you know, look, I read Parable of the Sower, you know, in 1996 or something like that. So speculative fiction has, you know, always been an interest of mine. When I heard about what CSI was doing and saw the work they were doing around speculative fiction and bringing together people to imagine different futures and sort of do a sprint, a narrative hackathon around a particular subject matter. So that was in like Weight of Light and Cities of Light, two earlier volumes that CSI put out. I thought, oh wow, I think this could be something for orchestras, and I do think that just to tip I guess to show my cards here, I think that after at the end of all this sort of journey that I've been on, all this, I think that uh, orchestras need to understand themselves more as places of learning than just as places of performance. I think that there's a few reasons why, but I also think just in terms of if you do think that there needs to be change, I think you need to create a context in which that could happen. And I think our sort of meta narrative as an orchestra is as places for expertise. You know, a good friend of mine, Weston Sprott, loves to say he's a dean over at Juilliard, plays in the Met Orchestra. Shout out to Weston. He loves to say that, like, isn't it such a funny thing that orchestras are this place that you your professional development ends the day you get hired, like by definition, because the narrative is you're here because you're done learning. So, you know, in a practical sense, just to locate like why could this be a problem? Case in point, you know, Ed mentioned 2020, 21, et cetera, et cetera. I got calls from a few different orchestras being like, hey, you said this here, you said this there. Could you come say this to my orchestra? I'm happy to do it. One question I would always ask is like, what's the impact you expect to get here, right? And they would say what they want. And then the next question would be like, do you have the mechanism to like bring, is this going to be voluntary or is this compulsory? And I don't actually have a personal opinion what it should be, or rather I don't care necessarily, but if we're going to set some goals here, let's at least figure out, you know, what can be done here. In a lot of cases, because the way orchestras are designed and you're hiring experts, there actually isn't a mechanism with which to gather people for some sort of collective learning, much less make that part of what we do. So in an acute sense, it's like, oh my gosh, things have changed. We need to learn something. It's like orchestras were struggling to even do that. And then much less, you know, thinking about like, how could this be integrated into our work and study as an ongoing thing? Again, just like to give it some body for the orchestral experts or domain people on the call. If you look at our contracts, right, there's a lot of language that contemplates so orchestras are tenured environments like universities. There's a lot of language that contemplates like what you would need to do to move someone from a tenured contract back to a probationary contract. And you would do that because they have departed from spec, right? They've departed from standard, the standard that was set at the time of their hiring. All that sort of speaks to the sort of mechanistic approach that we have to it, like a car. You drive your car off the lot, it's like you want it to stay. You don't expect your car to necessarily improve though, right? And I think there's no, if we look at that contract, there's no corresponding spot where we contemplate like your growth or the idea that your tenure would be, determined by that. So we don't evaluate for capacity for growth and all the things. So anyway, that's the gestalt of this whole thing. And I'm just really thrilled to have it all here. Last, most important thank yous to all the participating writers, essayists, authors who came out, spent 2 days with us. Granted, it was really nice weather. It was April of 2023, so we do have that going for us. But really, we're generous with their mind, with their thought, with their spirit, and brought out this book, which I think is really interesting, and I'm really proud to be a part of it.
And we should also thank the Sphinx organization and
Yeah.
the Flynn Foundation, who supported this project with some funding, which wouldn't have been possible to do this work otherwise. So very grateful for that. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We would love to hear from you. You can reach us using the Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom window with questions and comments. Feel free to put those in at any point, and we'll have some time at the end to field some of those from you. So please go for that if you'd like to. Let me turn over now. Let me invite Paul Miller to our virtual stage. Paul D. Miller, also known as DJ Spooky, is a composer, an artist, and a writer. His multimedia pieces have been exhibited at the Brooklyn Academy of Music and the Internet Archive, and his artwork has appeared at the Whitney Biennial and the Venice Biennial for architecture. You might know books like Sound Unbound on digital music and media, The Book of Ice, a visual and acoustic portrait of the Antarctic. He's also produced Pioneers of African American Cinema, which is a collection of the earliest films by African American directors. Very excited to have you here in conversation with us, Paul. Are you? There you are.
Yep.
All right. Welcome.
Hey, how you doing?
Um,
You guys, it's been great hearing you guys riff. So thank you.
Oh, it's great. It's been really fun, and it was wonderful that you were able to join us for the workshop to begin with. So I want to kick things off by actually asking you what drew you to the project. What kind of a relationship do you have with classical music, and how did the things that Alex was talking about, if those resonate with you? I know you've done a lot of composing yourself, and you've collaborated with musicians who trained in the classical tradition in lots of different ways. So, you know. What kind of inspired you or tempted you to get involved in this in the first place?
Okay, well let's get a little bit of overview. So the essay I wrote for the book with you guys is called Enter the Void. And I
Mhm.
was really impressed with what you guys are doing. I mean, Alex is incredible, you're incredible. I mean, it's one, it's refreshing, and then two, we live in like incandescently cynical times. I mean, and I think that the moment of the arts to help lead the way to rethinking democracy, rethinking being a stakeholder in cultural change, and above all, giving people multiple dimensions of thought, because it's just we are in an era of just incredible tumult. So to give you guys a sense of where I started, I grew up in Washington, D.C. Both my parents were professors. My father was dean of Howard University's law school, and my mother was a historian of design. And she had a book called Threads of Time: 500 Years of African American Women Designers that was very influential. And my father ended up representing quite a few political activists like Angela Davis or the Black Panthers and various other folks. So I grew up in a household that very much valued education, but was also in a cosmopolitan African American context. We went to Jamaica every summer because my mom was the art critic for the Kingston Daily Gleaner in Jamaica. We traveled to Senegal, for example. There's a place called Gorée Island, which is where the African American slave experience started, or at least was one of the major places. So I did that, at age 11, 12, 13, and so on. Um, and from my perspective, the thing about America is that a lot of people don't leave America. And it's fascinating to see that up until 9/11, when you were after 9/11, you were required to have a passport for more border stuff in like Mexico, Canada, and so on. The actual amount of people in the US with a passport is relatively small. So how does that tie in with music? On one hand, we are America. We are a crisis of like so many different ideologies right now. But the strength of America is the fact that we strive for this notion of a more perfect union. And American democracy comes out of this idea of the Enlightenment in Europe. And from my perspective, the orchestra was a reflection of certain contexts of history that Europe was grappling with, from the Industrial Revolution to the standardization of tuning systems, and above all, to the social hierarchy that kind of reflected the transition from being in a kingdom to a democracy. So the fall of monarchies, the rise of democracies. Many people have traced the lineage that we encounter now in the era of the internet and a data-driven society to a new way of rethinking what is sound and how we organize it. So sound systems. Um, So when I was hearing Alex speak earlier, I was really impressed. I've always been very impressed with his take. And Ed, what you're doing with the Center for Science and Imagination, it's visionary. The problem of our time is that one of my favorite science fiction writers is William Gibson. He has a phrase that says, "The future is already here. It's just unevenly distributed." Very simple, very elegant phrase of living in a non-linear, kind of post-quantum singularity culture. Raymond Kurzweil is a big influence on my thinking, and his idea of the singularity is something that has inspired quite a few futurists. Um, and so, one of the themes of the essay that I wrote for you guys was that how do we think of social organization and the way that the instruments and tuning systems of the orchestra kind of reflect this notion of wood, of steel, of gut string instruments, and as they migrate into digital code. Um, and the fun part about what is an instrument in this era is that an instrument can be anything. It can be an AI agent. It could be, like when I was walking up Fifth Avenue to get to our building here, two West African musicians were playing, and somebody was beatboxing, and three kids were breakdancing in front of it. So I was like, "That's New York. There we go." Um, and the beauty of that, and the sense of anything goes right now. I mean, you could make music out of literally anything. One of my favorite projects is I went to Antarctica, and I went to do what I call acoustic portraits of ice. So I took a studio and went through several of the major ice fields and recorded both the phenomenological and physical aspects of ice, but I also looked at the mathematics of ice. If you dig in to the actual molecular and then atomic structure of ice, it's actually quite mathematical. It's basically a glorified hexagon in a recursive logic. And if you take a mathematical equation of that, you're actually able to make a sound system out of the ice. So that project was called The Book of Ice. And currently, I'm producing a couple of film projects that are resonant with what you guys are talking about. One is with the actor Paul Robeson's estate, legendary African American actor who one could argue was influential on everyone from Samuel Jackson to Spike Lee to pretty much every major African American film person on and the other project is with Sergei Eisenstein's estate. Sergei Eisenstein was a Soviet composer. Well, he was a Soviet filmmaker who coined the term dialectical montage. And montage in cinema is when you have an edited cut that leads to an unexpected collision of other narrative cuts. So in our modern era, we live in a moment of editing. Everything from the video that's going to be made from this to the YouTube to TikTok to your average kid's cell phone, we have the ability to edit narrative as we go. And the beauty of looking at the history of that with Sergei Eisenstein, with his approach to collage, is that the world is now data collage. And from my perspective, collage is the helpful tool that will get us through this singularity, nonlinear moment of multiplicities and parallel universes. And there's a film I'm in that's coming out as well, and then I'll wrap up. It's about Sun Ra, and Sun Ra helped popularizing, sort of bring a visceral sense of physicality to the term the multiverse. And multiverse has quite a few resonances in science, and it's always important to me to point out that tuning systems are science. They are intuitive relationships to how we organize, kind of a relational aesthetic. So they're basically proportions and ratios, and that comes back from Pythagoras, the Greek philosopher. And tuning systems are also our bridge to the universe. There's many quantum physicists that actually think that the universe itself is a tuning system. The fabric of space-time is what you call string theory. So there's lots of layers of thought that went into my essay with you all. And I just wanted to say it was a pleasure working with you. And I look forward to part two. We should do more. So I hope I didn't go on too long there, but let's put it this way. One of my favorite points of closure here is that going from that William Gibson quote of the future is already here, but it's unevenly distributed. I'd like to leave, with a statement of saying that the imagination is the ultimate renewable resource. How do we get people to rethink, reuse, remix, and reply to a culture that is overwhelming and drowning us in information noise? And it's how we navigate that ocean of noise. To me, that's the new sound system. So, thank you.
That's beautiful. Thank you, Paul, for those remarks and all your very kind statements about CSI and this project. I loved your essay. It's wonderful. It's free, of course, for everybody who's here. The book is freely available on our website. And you made me think. You raised so many great themes in that opening statement. Well, one thing I want to pick up on. Well, first, you made me think of the quote from the 20th century physicist John Archibald Wheeler, who says, "We live in a participatory universe," which I think resonates with your idea of tuning. That what we've learned from quantum mechanics is we observe, and in a certain sense, our imagination of the universe is part of what makes it go. Parts of certainly the only way we access it is through our perception, our observation of it, and each observation of the universe also changes it. So I really love that notion of the participatory universe, and it I think points in an interesting way to another thread that you were bringing up, which is the fascinating dynamic. We could call it art and science, the science of tuning systems versus the art of performance and making music. The way that music, that lovely example when you were walking down the street in Manhattan, and there's a couple of West African musicians, there's somebody beatboxing, there's some kids dancing. Music is inherently open and participatory, and anybody can participate. Anybody can jump in. It accesses almost a pre-linguistic layer of human imagination, one of the few that is really widely accessible, because you don't need to share a language with somebody to make music with them. Maybe you need to share a musical language, but we have these sort of deep instincts around music and feeling. But then there's the other side, which is that actually to make music, it involves a lot of discipline and synchronization and coordination. And if music is freedom, in a certain sense, music is also an opposite of freedom. I don't know that it's necessarily tyranny, that you can look at the orchestra as a dictatorial structure with one person in charge with a stick, but it's also it's about human coordination, as Alex said. And so I just wanted to ask if you would riff on that a little bit. In your essay, you talk about the philosophical and also the etymological roots of the idea of the orchestra, right? And the orchestra is a place; it's a physical location, but also it's a metaphor, right? It's a metaphor, and it's interestingly ambivalent. You can read it as a metaphor for that pyramid of, we're going to keep everything the same. It's a stable structure. Or you can read it as a metaphor for freedom and emancipation and people making music in all sorts of powerful and sometimes, disestablishmentary ways, opening up the
Yeah.
world. So yeah, what do you think?
Well, my favorite term these days is disinhibitionation, which is a functional psychoanalytic term that they're applying to Trump right now because he's kind of like melting and his brain is swirling into chaos. And it's also like the East Wing of the White House where it's just been demolished, and we're living in the sort of, we're the first empire to dissolve itself with social media. It's been a fascinating turn of events to have worked with you guys on this book while democracy is under crisis. And I find that democracy and tyranny versus sound and freedom, these are kind of, it's like Schrodinger's cat. You perceive something, you bring it in. I loved your idea of the participatory universe. And Wheeler, he has a nice bridge to Einstein, because Einstein was actually quite a talented musician. People don't realize that when he couldn't finish his equations, he would pace and he would play violin. And one of his favorite things to do was to transcribe Bach's Goldberg variations into violin studies. And so Bach's Goldberg variations is one of the most, to me, the best bridge between that classical kind of, white modernism, kind of theme, white people playing in tune with each other, over to the electronics of our time, which is, I always chuckle about the subtext of a lot of this is, of course, the microchip. And we're in this era of the electronic imagination, and people like John Cage with his piece, 4 minutes 33 seconds of nothing. Essentially, your brain's electrical impulses are helping put that together. So the possibility of how your ear translates into an electrical impulse, the way your brain chemistry and the prefrontal cortex helps organize the haptics of things. These are all, we're living in this massive experiment right now where nobody has lived with so much technology around them. Even when you're walking, like to go back to that New York metaphor, America has so much electricity, it's humming. The city is literally attuned to. A lot of people say it's in B flat, and in Europe is in G because of they're in 220 volts. I might be off by one or two keys, but don't hold me to that. But basically, it's either A flat or B flat, if I remember correctly. But 110 volts, think of the hum. And every air conditioner, every refrigerator, even the hum of the electricity and the cables going to your computer. And on top of that, the fact that the laptop is a meta instrument that can be both a writing tool and a musical tool. So the laptop has become the pro forma dimensional portal into this idea of interdisciplinary projects. So I usually tend to refer to Wagner because he's controversial and he was racist and homophobic and pretty much he was Hitler's favorite composer. So imagine being at Dachau and hearing the Ring Cycle, and you just realize that his relationship to Nietzsche, Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher. Nietzsche is one of my favorites as well, but again, there's this kind of totalitarianism that was undergirded by misinterpreting Wagner and misinterpreting Nietzsche, and that the German aesthetic of the mid 20th century, of course, the Germans prioritized their classical music, and they called anything else was called Untaugte Kunst, which means degenerate art, or Untaugte Musik. And they banished jazz and they banished all compositions by Jews. So the music sucked. So you can imagine it must have been terrible to have no music by Jewish people or Black people. And in closing, I'll just say the funny thing about dystopia and utopia, totalitarian versus freedom versus, is it's still a system. And so any system can be hacked, cracked, and completely remixed. So I firmly believe that music, it will be, if you go, I'll just one last quick example is, let's go to classical Athens with the crisis of democracy when Pericles set up a system where the Athenian golden age happened. You have the building of the Acropolis. You have all these incredible playwrights. You had Plato, Socrates, Aeschylus, Euripides, these incredible vista of people that just came about from when they overthrew the oligarchs. And Athens then became the foundation for what we think of as democracy. And millennia later, we're still dealing with the echoes of that overthrow of the oligarchs. So here we are, and music is a mirror we hold up to society. And I'm just seeing this, seething data storm around us of algorithms and frequencies. And, imagine if you were a creature that just saw frequencies or just saw, kind of the modulation of data as your basic inhabitant, and that's where you get to one of my favorite stories for our time is Edwin Abbott's Flatlands. And Flatlands is essentially about dimensionalization. And I think we're kind of going through that now as a species. Like we're moving out and further away from this etherealization of the body. And data is our mirror to that. And we're just figuring it out. Anyway, that's my take.
That's a great answer. And honestly, I could talk about this with you all day long. I want to make sure we leave a little time for our next conversation coming up. So maybe we'll pause here, but I hope we can come back to some of these issues when we come to the Q&A. But this was great, Paul. Thank you so much. It was really fun to work with you, and absolutely, this was just the beginning. I'm very excited to do new things with you, and we'll talk more about that. All right, thank you. Alex, hand it over to you.
All right, that was great. So yes, encourage everyone to download and check out Paul's essay. And thanks, Ed and Paul, for that conversation. I'm really excited now to introduce two more contributors to the project. So we have with us Ashley Lauren Frith. Ashley is a violist, composer, facilitator, and educator. She's living in Los Angeles now. Currently, she formerly lived in Providence, Rhode Island, where she worked for community music work. And she'll be able to talk a little bit more about that. But just to sum up, her work is held and supported by a contemplative end-of-life practice and yogic training driven by deep healing and total liberation for all beings. With Ashley, we also have Deji Olukotun. Deji, he's a writer. He works for a sound technology company. His novel After the Flare won the 2018 Philip K. Dick Special Citation and was chosen as a best book of 2017 by the Washington Post. He's done a lot of other stuff, so I encourage you to go check them out. And enough from me. I'd love to hear from both of you. Maybe we could go in reverse order. Could you just begin by briefly describing your contribution to the book?
Yeah, thanks, Alex. It's so good to be here. It feels like a long time ago that we all sat together in a room and everyone just blew my mind. I grew up listening to classical music. I played violin when I was young. It was classical music was important in my family. But I learned so much. I realized there was so much I didn't understand about performance, about practice, about who gets to be included and who doesn't get to be included. And these were all things I had felt just being a part of classical music myself and going to concerts. So sat down with the group and we hashed out a bunch of ideas and we were thinking about orchestra as a public good. And one of the participants in my little group mentioned, well, why don't you think about New Orleans, setting the story in New Orleans? I thought about that. I said, oh, yeah, okay, I've been there a couple times. I don't pretend to understand New Orleans from a deep level, but I thought that's a great anchor. I thought, well, what would happen with climate change? What role could a community orchestra play if there's an event induced by human cause climate change? And that was the origin of the story. And then I wrote a short fiction story called Symphony for the Boohag. And there are lots of influences, partly learning through the workshop about lots of different tensions. You heard some of them from Paul and Ed just talking a moment ago. And then there were a couple of other little influences in the background. One of them, I read a story by Tananarive Due called Free Jim's Mind. It was in this collection called Long Hidden. It was one of the first diverse book collections that came out, 11 years ago. And there was just something about her tone and how she centered it on African-American history and folklore that really moved me. And then I happened to be reading a book about African-American folklore edited by Henry Louis Gates Jr. So it's just all these things coming together and say, how can I express this into a story? And I started with children. I've got young children. I think sometimes we think of children as being naive and innocent, and it's true. But that wasn't my experience of being a child. My experience of being a child was I wanted to understand. I wanted to take things seriously. Emotions hit me hard. It was like a sucker punch in the face. We understood and then we didn't understand. So I centered this story that follows these three children who are trying to make sense of what's happening after a hurricane has swept through their ward in New Orleans. And they've grown up fast because they've seen dead bodies, people who've drowned in the hurricane, but they're still children, so they don't understand some things. So they're exploring, and then they meet they have to deal with this spirit that's haunting the ward called the Boohag. And this Boohag is directly taken from African-American folklore. I tried to be respectful with it as much as I could. There are many different manifestations of the Boohag. Not every culture thinks of it the same way, but kind of this ghostly spirit that haunts you and haunts the woods. So I was looking at that. How can I combine all these different things, all the different influences that I heard that day when we did the workshop, and set it to a story? So it's a bit of exploring a haunted house and then trying to find out how does this all tie into the orchestra. I'll stop there because I went off for a long time, but I'm happy to dig into any of that.
That's terrific. Ashley, same question. Can you just sort of talk about your piece and what was informing it? What the key ideas are to your take on it?
Yeah, happy to be here with you all. So the section that I was assigned to was Orchestra as Network. So that was this small, wonderful group of folks that I got to just sort of mostly think through and talk with during our time together. And I think maybe towards a lot of wonderful ideas, but towards the end of that conversation with the full group, when we were sharing back, this idea of being out of network came up. And it was really related to just trying to put words to my and many of my colleagues' experience of like this like aspirational relationship to like orchestra as a network, and what are the amazing and beautiful things about like being a part of and connecting and having all these threads and connections, and like how like so much of our life experience where you can feel so disconnected and out of that. And so I'll speaking personally, this like work came from just kind of being as honest as possible about my own relationship to my classical Western European classical music experience, and this like something that's so deeply a part of me and with me, and like that I am in this world, and what it feels like to sometimes feel so deeply disconnected from it. So this like that term out of network was such a big part of this thing that I wrote, which was just sort of describing like a bit of the journey from all the good and the bad, I guess, of like what this experience of being a part of in this world, in this field, in this body that I'm in, how that sort of just like what feels connected and worked and has been amazing, and all the ways in which it's been really challenging and hard. And the piece, I think, what came out of something that became really vulnerable and honest also just was like hopefully like little bits and pieces of like a template for possibilities of how to do things differently, of like how do we like get to these spaces, these work environments, these artistic spaces, these sharing spaces, to feel like a network and to feel like these places that are community and people oriented and supportive. And yeah, so that's a bit of yeah, I'll just say a little bit of, around like direction, and there's a bit about fugitivity that relates to that too that I can talk about a little bit later. But yeah, I'll stop there.
That's fantastic. And for our audience, let me actually review something you guys have both brought into view. So for the workshop, we organized our 16 participants into 4 groups, each one looking at and imagining the future of the orchestra through a different lens. So I'll just run through those. So we had the orchestra, and we sort of, each one was formulated as the orchestra as, and then there'd be a thing. And so it's like, what would the orchestra as blank look like? What would the orchestra as blank look like? So we had the orchestra's public good. That was asking how we might measure orchestras by the tangible good they create and share, not just by what they perform. We had the orchestra as game. That was designed to remind us that orchestras are shaped by their constraints, objectives, measures, and rewards, and changing those rules could yield a very different kind of orchestra. So some of the things we had to first unsettle is that like these things are fixed, right? It's like, no, this is a game and set like this. It's like if you change this, it changes these outcomes. Okay. Network, as Ashley was just talking about, is we looked at how we organize ourselves, right? What systems we model, what relationships we depend on. And then the last one was orchestra as infrastructure, and that looked at the built environment, and also the orchestra is both a user and a builder of the infrastructure of culture and knowledge and human capacity. So orchestra as public good, orchestra as game, orchestra as network, orchestra as infrastructure. But getting back to these individual pieces here, Ashley, you had mentioned fugitivity, which and the work of Fred Moten, which I think was a vein that you mined in your piece. You just want to talk about what that means, what it means to you, how you sort of brought it into view. And the other thing I'll just say, so we can hear from you, is you have a great line in your piece, right? I love classical music. I love you, right? Can we do better? Or something.
I love that line too. I wrote it down.
Yeah. And so if you could maybe share with our audience this idea of fugitivity and anything else in there that we can just go a little deeper with you.
Yeah. So just like I think when we think of the word fugitive, there's a very like clear relationship to it being a forced state, like it's a state that is not by choice. And we can think historically of folks being fugitives if we go back to chattel slavery in this country and folks like being in a situation where they were physically, emotionally, mentally not safe. They were living in conditions that were not sustainable, and their families and their lineage was literally at risk, if they decided to stay where they were. And so this forced state of like choosing to try to escape and shift just geographically where folks were to just try for something else to attain a different life circumstance and situation for themselves and their families. So I think like the relationship of just being a fugitive, and unfortunately, like we're thinking about this moment that we're in with the intensity of deportation, where unfortunately there are folks that are in this state of fugitivity at this moment where they have had to remove themselves from the basic relations of their lives of where they work and live and children going to school just to feel like they can protect themselves and their families from not being forcibly removed, imprisoned, and possibly sent to situations that are harmful and unsafe. So, like, I think just taking that in, this idea of fugitivity that Fred Moten offers, and Bayo Komolafe is another deep thinker that I was inspired by and related to this, is just this thinking of fugitivity as actually not like back to the wall, like it's only this state where you come to it because there's no other choice. But within that is creating standards that are our own, standards that are my own. So it's just sort of refusing these systems and the what is considered legal, what is considered right and morally correct, and saying, actually, we're gonna go beyond this and not just kind of like follow what's directly in front of us and what we're being told and communicated that is correct and okay. And I think there are many moments in our own personal lives where we can be like, this doesn't make sense. And this is whether it's inhumane or doesn't feel right or it's just unsustainable, whether it's an amount of work or so many levels. And so thinking about for myself is this definition of creating standards that are my own. So it's not no longer like adhering to like hopes and like just taking in forward what the people in power, the systems that are in place say that we have to sort of align and structure ourselves with and uphold, but saying, what are my standards? What is my standard for education, for food quality, and sources, for community care, my relationship to time and work and play and joy? Like it's how I treat others and treat myself, where my tax dollars go. Like I think this relationship to fugitivity is just literally saying that my standards can actually be completely different and have a completely different set of like moral like beams of which I'm sort of deciding of how I'm showing up in the world, and not just like adhering to what I'm being told or instructed to do, or even I think about being as a Black queer woman in the society, like what's decided from by others what my place is, like how much I communicate and in what spaces and what's my tone, and so many layers there. But yeah, I'll stop there.
I'm gonna ask one quick question, then I want to get to Deji. But well, one, I want to say that yes, then one of the sort of conceits behind looking at the orchestra as network is sort of some wondering around like, are orchestras perfectly transitioned to model how humans might be in some different relations to each other, right? We've mentioned before, like we represent a certain sort of ideal or narrative about how humans should organize themselves, right? One person elevated and blah. And so like, could we actually wrestle? Could that be kind of what we perform, right? Could we actually wrestle with that in real time, against the backdrop of, a water crisis in Phoenix or a community crisis in another town, or just our own unhappiness inside the orchestra, right? But Ashley, just because I feel like if you could speak a little bit to what is this, and just very quickly, and I know it's a long topic, but what is this look like, feel like, in terms of you with your viola in hand somewhere along this path as relates to orchestras? If we could just root ourselves a little bit in that originating context.
I think with my own instruments, I'll say briefly that looks like can look like what I'm playing, that I'm playing relating to the standard rep that is in my life and a part of my relationship to work and how I feed myself, but also that means that connects to deeper relationships to improvisation and processing emotions and feelings with my instrument, which is not something that one generally learns in music school. And it also means that my instrument can be with me and can be out of a concert hall and in a mental health facility, which is a place that I do residencies often, or schools, and it could be in homeless shelters and places that we don't always see this, where it's just like, and instead of being like, hey, I'm coming in here to share this thing with you that I know you want to listen to because it's going to better your life, but it's actually like, hey, can we like, does anybody want to hang out and just make some sounds and process what we're feeling in this moment? So I think there's like, I don't know if that's clear, but just a relationship to like having my instrument, and it's can be more than this thing that's entered for entertainment for others. And it can be a form to sort of connect and share and be in spaces with other folks without forcing things, but can add support. I think music and sound can be a beautifully supportive thing, and there's just a lot of angles that we can approach it that are not constrictive or hierarchical.
Love it, love it. Deji, so if you could talk about, you were one of the contributors who had less direct experience with orchestras coming into the project. And also, so I'd be interested to know, what some takeaways you had and some impressions you had around that. And also, I'd love to hear about a role you think orchestras and musical organizations and institutions more generally ought to be playing in addressing the effects of climate change and other environmental disasters.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Alex. So I felt very welcome in the workshop, and I asked a lot of questions that I think were, for folks who are coming from the symphony orchestra tradition, might have been surprising that I just didn't know the answer to that. I was like, what do you guys do after the concert's done? Where do you put your, do you go get a drink? Do you go home? I just didn't know this stuff. Like, what is the lived experience of a musician? And I learned so much, and it was just a day of absorbing and listening and learning. And first of all, how committed folks are to making the orchestra more than just a place where you have to be quiet and someone hushes you. And we've all had those experiences, that it could be more. So I really felt that optimism that this was not an archaic institution that we're gonna just try to protect. We're gonna try to evolve it. I felt that come out of the workshop. And in terms of kind of, my contribution here is really telling a story and trying to give it some narrative heft, and like I said at the beginning, follow children who are experiencing a climactic or a hurricane. They're the aftermath of a hurricane and trying to navigate the neighborhood they live in. So I use that as the vehicle. That was the way we're going to explore these themes. And in the story, the orchestra helps resolve the conflict. So it's a community space. And in our group, we talked about the usher. That was something that came up again and again, that for people who are coming from outside, who aren't the musicians, the usher is the one who's bridging this professional place and the place of the audience. And sometimes they can be oppressive, and they go after you. Happened to me, where you got a little tiny water bottle this big, and they won't let you have that little water bottle, and they make a big scene out of it. Or they welcome you and they say, hey, welcome to our space. This is what's going to happen here. So that's what we tried to do in the story, is the usher is the bridge between the community and this musical experience. And the usher ultimately is the one who helps the kids resolve this tension in the story. So that was important, finding these mechanisms to help make people safe. I did have a little bit of fantasy in it, with the boo hag from folklore, like I mentioned. And then in my day job, we've been working with organizations that use AI to promote biodiversity. There's been a lot of listening to understand what's happening in the environment. There's machine learning and great tools to do that. And this is flipping it on its head a bit. What can we do to send out sounds to enrich the neighborhood, the environment? And that was another theme that we dug into, trying to bring a little bit of tech into the story because it's kind of a sci-fi fantasy story.
Love it, love it. All right, well, I'm going to invite Ed and Paul to come back, and I think Joey's going to help us with some questions that might be in the chat. I know that we're heading towards the top of the hour, and people start, it's like a plane getting over like a parachute drop zone. People just start bailing out of these things. So let me just go ahead and say thanks to everybody in case we're going to lose anybody, both here on the host side or on the audience side. And then, let's get to some questions if we have any.
Yeah, there's at least one I can see here from Tasha Foster. This is for you, Paul, about, since I think you were bringing up, musical notes and the different frequency of 110 versus 220. So the question is, what do you know of the musical note C and it being altered, thus affecting different music? So has C changed?
That's that's a play on words right there, sea change. It's a beautiful moment because I think that the note of C is generally considered like one of the sort of centerpieces of a piano and stuff like that. And from my perspective, tuning systems that we have they're basically at 440 hertz, which is a whole thing because the German orchestras, again, we're doing 432, and post World War II, most of the tuning systems and the optimized the way that orchestras play. And again, I'm just an artist who does computer stuff, but I love orchestras, so I wouldn't say I'm a specialist in any of this by any means. But as someone who just writes a lot and reads a lot, my take on it is that we're in a digital ocean, and that digital ocean is omnipresent and omnivorous. Anything that can be digital will be digital. And we're going to be seeing a far more what I call agentic agents, AI agents, composing coming up. And in fact, a lot of people are already playing with full-scale synthesized, actors, composers, hypothetical scenarios. That this is just the beginning, and I'd say within 2 or 3 years, as we get more computational power, you'll be seeing far more immersive media and interdisciplinary approaches to things. I celebrate that. Some people don't. I'm always happy to have some controversy because I don't think anybody should just accept anything. But the economy itself is going to be going through a radical transition as we move away from the production of physical goods to the production of imaginary experiences. And we're at this cusp point where the 20th century's legacy in hard media, physicality, and above all, an economy of physical goods based on scarcity and things like that. So I always chuckle about this because the note C still has that kind of like dun dun, it just has the center of the keyboard approach to things. But imagine if your keyboard was as big as the universe, where would the C be? And from my perspective, again, I kind of default to that Sun Ra approach of just thinking of, what he liked to call the altered destiny, which is the African American culture and the collision with European aesthetics that the African American culture engendered because of both the slave experience and Reconstruction and recovery. You see this collision of aesthetics and approaches. And I think that that's been an incredible legacy of electronic music that has reshaped the global imagination. So to go to the heart of your question, C is what you can imagine it to be. There we go. I think that kind of rhymes. There we go.
That's beautiful. I know Paul has to leave right at the top of the hour, but we have one more question. Maybe I'll pose it to Ashley and Deji, and hopefully they can give us at least a quick take on it, and we'll try to wrap close to on time. This is from Loki Karuna. Have your ideas or opinions changed since the publication of this collection? As a contributor, one thing that I took for granted during the process was the fact that the dialogues and work that led to it are only one moment in time. And, opinion continues to evolve. So I think that's a really interesting question. What do you think?
I think that yes, like there's definitely like you write something, and that was actually part of my like nervousness of like just something getting sort of published, printed, like where it's like you just do it and then it's that's it, you know? And so I think definitely it was good to just I was forced to just like pause, you know, like sort of have a thought and be like, okay, that's my thought right now, and own it and be with it. And I think definitely that's my relationship to all of the ideas that I offered in my chapter have just expanded and continue to sort of develop and grow. And my relationship to fugitivity has shifted and changed. And even just all the practices that I've used and that supported me, and the work, the facilitation work that I've done around in like classical music spaces around equity and belonging have just continued to expand and to grow. Maybe one element that has feels like clearer and affirmed is just like the relationship to like embodied practices and just care. And it's just really interesting how like, you know, as we were in this moment where we have it's like, well, is art important? There's all these questions that are constantly being asked over and over again. It's like, are these things in important to our society? And then most people are like, always yes. But, you know, in like real time in practice, when we sort of cling to our like fields and just our like livelihoods and also just to art itself, it just feels more and more important that embodied relationship to our own bodies and to understanding each other and the way that we're showing up, and how we relate to art, not just as something that's sort of separate and removed or something to put others on or put ourselves on a pedestal with, but actually to feel and to be with and to process, just makes it like just safer and more real and more present. So I think those are just a few thoughts that are with me right now that just feels like that are definitely continuing to percolate and just like expanding and growing within myself right now.
Thank you. Deji?
Yeah, sure. I would say we had one discussion about virtuosity and what does it mean to be a virtuoso, which I think is familiar to folks in the symphony orchestra space. But I've been noodling on that for a while. What are the things that you're expected to be a virtuoso at, and whose standard is that? And what are you bringing to what is that contributing, and what is lost as well? If that's where you're putting your energy is to become a virtuoso, maybe you could be connecting with people or doing something more fulfilling for yourself instead of trying to get every little thing right by someone else's standards. So that's a concept that's just been sitting with me, and it's a really nice way of challenging kind of like Paul was saying, the accepted kind of approaches to things. I think I have a human rights background. Much of my career is spent in the field of human rights, so I'd say I'm now much more attuned to, no pun intended, to free expression. Thinking about what does that mean in the classical music context? What does free expression mean? Are people? Someone challenged me. We were just having a discussion the other day. There used to be a lot more protest songs. There used to be more, or are those songs being written, but they're not making it to a place where people can hear them? So that would probably influence how I would approach things today is where are those stories being told? What's missing? But other than that, I wrote a piece of fiction and I tried to write it working with you all because you're amazing editors, to make it not be just of the moment, but also have a little bit of staying power because it's a narrative and a story that's meant to hold for a little while.
Well, thank you both. I think I'm going to pause here because we're a little bit over time and just say thank you all for your contributions. Thank you for showing up today to help us launch this thing into the world. As Joey put into the chat, this book is free to download and share. You can get it on several different platforms. Please send it to your friends, send it to your enemies, send it to the people you're not sure about yet, and help us get the word out. Each of our projects is an invitation. It's not the end, it's the beginning. And so looking forward to new things blossoming out of this as well. And thank you one more time to the panelists, and thank you, Alex. Any final words before we sign off?
No, I
Yeah,
think he was.
oh,
Oh,
can
please.
I?
Yeah,
Yeah,
please.
and I actually want
Please.
to say, Alex and Ed, you guys are amazing as catalyzers and conveners. This is a really unique experience, and I really hope that more people get a chance to tune into what you guys are doing, because these are, like I said, very incandescent. My nickname right now is we're in an incandescently cynical time. And my motto these days is like Trump's last happy memory. It was like when he was at Studio 54, so it's like he always would play the Village People YMCA at these crazy Trump rallies. So you get disco that was from the gayest group of the 70s. Nothing homophobic there, but they were. So it was like a theme from Studio 54, and so he still plays that, like it's just looping in his brain, like my nickname is right now we're in sort of a cosmic meta broken disco. We're in the dumbest timeline. And it's definitely just refreshing to see convenings like this. And so I just want to say I salute to everybody, and I love hearing your stories, and just please do more. It's very inspiring.
Thank you.
I couldn't end it better, except to say thanks to the Sphinx organization, which gave me an Empower grant. Thanks personally from myself to Ed and CSI. Special shout out to Joey. I think a lot of people on the call maybe do stuff in life, and fill in the blank for whoever it is that actually gets the stuff done, and that's Joey on this project. It really wouldn't exist without him. Maybe he's going to come on screen. There he is, the star who really actually
Thanks, everyone.
the conductor of our sound system trains that gets us there on time. Shout out to the Flynn Foundation, which was so kind to come behind Sphinx's support and allow us to bring these great people together. And yes, onward, let's do more, right? Let's do more. So thanks to everyone who tuned in, of course.
All right.
Thanks all.
All right. Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Sorry. Bye.
Thanks.